My name is Blaine, 35 years old, and I was the only person who understood how the Sequoia demo system really worked. After 5 years of building it from scratch, I knew every line of code. So when Marcus, my toxic VP, said those fateful words, I felt strangely calm. "Here's my notice and a 2-minute warning for the Sequoia demo," I said, closing my laptop. What happened next changed everything. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more workplace revenge stories like this one. Apex Technology was supposed to be my dream job. When I joined the company 5 years ago, as a senior software engineer, I was bursting with enthusiasm and ideas. The startup had just secured its first major funding round, and there was this electric feeling in the air that we were building something revolutionary. Our flagship product was an AI-driven data analytics platform that could process massive data sets and extract actionable insights much faster than anything else on the market. The potential applications were endless: finance, healthcare, retail, you name it. I was brought in specifically to develop what would eventually become the Sequoia system, named after the giant redwood trees, because it was meant to be robust, long-lasting, and towering above the competition. Sequoia wasn't just any demo system. It was an intricate, fully functional proof of concept that showcased everything our technology could do. It was designed to wow investors and clients by showing real-time analysis of their own data during meetings. My core team was small but dedicated. Laura was our front-end developer, brilliant with user interfaces and making complex data visualizations that even non-technical people could understand. We became fast friends, often staying late to troubleshoot problems together or grabbing dinner when we worked into the evening. James was our infrastructure engineer, quiet but incredibly competent, the kind of person who could solve server issues before anyone else even realized there was a problem. Sophia was our project manager, organized and diplomatic, who somehow managed to keep us on track despite the constantly shifting priorities from upper management. Then there was Marcus. When I first met him, he was heading up the sales department and had a reputation for being aggressive but effective. He had this way of commanding a room, tall with perfectly styled dark hair and designer suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. People listened when he spoke, and I admit I was impressed initially by his confidence and ability to close deals. The trouble began when our company went through a restructuring after our second funding round. Our original VP of product development left for a competitor, and somehow Marcus got the job despite having no technical background whatsoever. I had been hoping for that promotion myself, having led the development of our core technology for 3 years at that point. I had the technical expertise, the vision, and the respect of the engineering team. But when I asked Richard, our CEO, about the decision, he gave me some vague answer about Marcus having leadership qualities and business acumen that would help us go to market effectively. Richard was a former investment banker who had pivoted to tech with some successful exits under his belt, but he wasn't a technical founder. He relied heavily on Daniel, our CTO, for all things technical. Daniel was brilliant, but conflict-averse, the kind of person who would rather solve a complex technical problem than deal with interpersonal issues. So when Marcus started making waves, Daniel tended to look the other way as long as deliverables were being met. Everything came to a head when we landed the opportunity to pitch to Sequoia Capital, not related to our system name, but one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. They were considering leading our Series C round, potentially $20 million, that would help us scale our operations and expand into new markets. It was the kind of deal that could make or break a company like ours. The pitch meeting was scheduled for exactly 1 month out, and Marcus immediately called an all-hands meeting to announce that we would be developing a special demo specifically for this occasion. Despite the fact that I had built the original Sequoia system and had been maintaining it for years, Marcus announced that he would be overseeing the development personally and that I would be supporting his vision. I still remember sitting in that meeting, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Laura shot me a sympathetic glance across the table, and James stared determinedly at his laptop, but no one said anything. It was clear that Marcus was positioning himself to take credit for my work, and the leadership team was allowing it to happen. What made it even more infuriating was that Marcus had no idea how complex the Sequoia system actually was. It wasn't just a simple demo that could be tweaked in a few days. It was a sophisticated platform with multiple interdependent components, custom-built APIs, and proprietary algorithms that I had developed over years. You couldn't just make major changes to it without understanding how everything fit together. But Marcus didn't want to hear that. He wanted a completely redesigned interface with new features all ready in time to dazzle the Sequoia Capital partners. And he wanted me to make it happen while he took all the credit. Little did I know that this project would lead to the most satisfying 2 minutes of my professional career when I finally decided that enough was enough. The first red flag appeared during our initial planning meeting for the Sequoia Capital demo. I had prepared a comprehensive presentation outlining the current system capabilities, potential enhancements we could realistically implement in the time frame, and areas where we needed to be careful about making changes. I had spent the entire weekend working on it, complete with mock-ups and technical specifications. When I arrived at the conference room, Marcus was already there with Richard Daniel and a few other executives. I set up my laptop ready to present, but before I could even pull up my slides, Marcus jumped in. "I've been thinking about the direction for this demo," he announced, pulling up his own presentation. What followed was essentially a watered-down version of ideas I had shared with him in passing the week before, mixed with some technically impossible requests. "We need the system to predict market trends in real time, with 99% accuracy," he declared confidently. "And I want impressive visuals, really cutting-edge stuff. Think Minority Report, but more sophisticated." I tried to interject. "Marcus, predicting market trends with that level of accuracy isn't realistically possible with current technology. Even the most advanced models can only achieve about 75 to 80% accuracy under ideal conditions." He gave me that look that would become all too familiar, a mixture of dismissal and irritation. "Blaine, if we're going to secure this funding, we need to show them something revolutionary. I'm not interested in limitations." And just like that, he moved on without addressing my concerns. After the meeting, when I tried to follow up with him privately about the technical constraints, he cut me off. "Just make it happen, Blaine. That's what we pay you for." Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. I would work late into the night trying to implement some version of what Marcus wanted, only to have him change the requirements the next morning. He would pop by my desk unannounced, leaning over my shoulder and making comments about the interface or functionality without understanding the complexity behind what he was seeing. "This looks basic," he'd say, pointing at a data visualization that had taken days to optimize. "Can't you make it more dynamic, more impactful?" When I explained that what he was seeing was just the front end, and that the real sophistication was in the algorithms processing the data behind the scenes, he would wave his hand dismissively. "The investors won't see the algorithms, Blaine. They'll see the interface. It needs to wow them." One particularly frustrating incident occurred during a progress update meeting with the whole team. I was explaining some of the challenges we were facing with integrating a new data source when Marcus interrupted. "I think we're overcomplicating this," he said, as if he had any idea about the technical challenges involved. "Why don't we just use a simpler approach?" He then proceeded to suggest a solution that showed his complete lack of understanding of how our system worked. It would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. Laura caught my eye across the table and gave me a subtle eye roll. Later, she pulled me aside in the break room. "You know he did the same thing to Amanda before she left, right?" Laura said, keeping her voice low. "He would shoot down all her ideas in meetings, then present them as his own a week later." Amanda had been a product manager who left abruptly 6 months earlier. At the time, it had been chalked up to her getting a better offer elsewhere, but now I was starting to wonder. James was experiencing similar frustrations. Marcus had tasked him with setting up a new staging environment for the demo, but kept changing the specifications without understanding the work involved in each change. It took 3 days to configure the server the way he wanted it. James confided during a rare moment when we both took a coffee break. Then he decided he wanted a completely different setup. When I tried to explain why that would set us back, he asked if I was refusing to do my job. Can you believe that? The public criticism was the worst part. Marcus seemed to take particular pleasure in highlighting what he perceived as failures on my part during team meetings. "Blaine's team is behind schedule again," he would announce, despite the fact that his constant changes were the primary reason for any delays. Or, "Blaine, I'm not seeing the innovative thinking I expected from you on this project," ignoring the numerous innovative solutions I had developed to meet his impossible demands. Other team members would shoot me sympathetic glances, but no one ever contradicted Marcus publicly. The culture of fear he had created was too strong. Even Daniel, our CTO, who should have understood the technical challenges we were facing, remained silent during these criticisms, though he would occasionally try to smooth things over privately afterward. Marcus is under a lot of pressure from the board, Daniel told me after one particularly brutal meeting. Just try to give him what he wants for this demo, and things will calm down afterward. But I was beginning to realize that things wouldn't calm down. Marcus had found his scapegoat, and as long as I was useful, but not threatening to his position, he would continue to exploit my skills while undermining my confidence and authority. What made it even more difficult was that Marcus had no technical background, yet he insisted on making technical decisions. He would use buzzwords he had picked up in conversations with other executives or articles he had skimmed without understanding their meaning or implications. When I or other engineers tried to explain why certain approaches wouldn't work, he would accuse us of being too caught up in the details or not seeing the big picture. "We need blockchain integration," he announced one day, about 2 weeks before the demo. When I asked him what specific blockchain functionality he thought would benefit our analytics platform, it became clear he had no idea. He just knew blockchain was a hot topic and thought it would impress the investors. It was becoming increasingly clear that Marcus wasn't just difficult, he was toxic, especially to women on the team. He interrupted me and Laura constantly while letting the male engineers finish their thoughts. He would question our technical judgments more harshly, and he had a habit of explaining basic concepts to us that we obviously already understood as senior professionals in our field. The environment was becoming unbearable, but I had invested so much of myself in the Sequoia system. It was my creation, my professional legacy at this company. I couldn't just walk away from it. Not yet, anyway. As the Sequoia Capital pitch approached, the pressure intensified exponentially. My typical 50-hour work weeks ballooned to 80-plus hours, with late nights becoming the norm rather than the exception. I was surviving on caffeine takeout, and the sheer determination to make this demo succeed, despite Marcus. The technical challenges were immense. Marcus wanted to showcase our system analyzing financial data, healthcare metrics, and retail trends, simultaneously switching between them seamlessly to demonstrate versatility. Each of these domains required different data models, visualizations, and processing pipelines. It was like building 3 separate demos in one, with all the complexity that entailed. What made it worse was Marcus's complete disregard for the technical process. He would demand daily previews, not understanding that some features took multiple days of back-end work before anything could be shown on the interface. When I tried to explain this, he accused me of making excuses. "Facebook can roll out updates to billions of users every day," he said during one tense meeting. "Are you telling me you can't update a simple demo?" I took a deep breath. Facebook has thousands of engineers and has built robust systems over many years, specifically designed for continuous deployment. We're a team of 4 trying to completely overhaul a complex analytics platform in less than a month. The comparison isn't relevant. Marcus leaned forward, his expression hardening. "If you can't handle the pressure of a startup environment, Blaine, perhaps this isn't the right place for you." The threat was clear, and it wasn't the first time he had implied my job was on the line. I bit my tongue and went back to work, seething inside, but determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me crack. The breaking point came 3 weeks into the project. We had been making progress despite the obstacles, and I had managed to implement a clever workaround for one of Marcus's more impossible demands involving real-time predictive analytics. It wasn't exactly what he had asked for, but it created the impression he wanted while actually being technically feasible. I called a meeting to demonstrate this solution, hoping that finally seeing tangible progress would ease some of the tension. Richard and Daniel both attended along with Marcus and our immediate team. I walked through the solution, explaining how we had leveraged existing algorithms in a new way to create the appearance of real-time prediction while actually using a sophisticated caching system behind the scenes. It wasn't perfect, but it was innovative and effective given our constraints. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Richard spoke up. "This is impressive work, Blaine. I think this will really resonate with the Sequoia partners." I felt a surge of vindication, but it was short-lived. "I'm not convinced," Marcus said, crossing his arms. "It feels like we're cutting corners. The brief I gave was for actual real-time predictions, not smoke and mirrors." "It's not smoke and mirrors," I countered, my frustration finally bubbling over. "It's a pragmatic solution to an impossible request. What you ask for would require technological capabilities that simply don't exist yet." Marcus's face flushed. "I think you're just not trying hard enough. Other companies are doing real-time predictions. I've seen the demos." "Those demos are exactly that, Marcus. Demos. Pre-programmed simulations designed to look impressive in controlled environments. They're not actual functioning systems. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. I had directly challenged Marcus in front of the CEO and CTO, something no one did in our company culture. Marcus smiled thinly. Well, I think we have different standards of excellence then. I'm not interested in settling for adequate when we need exceptional. The meeting ended shortly after, with Marcus declaring he would reconsider the approach. I left the room shaking with anger and frustration. Sophia, our project manager, caught up with me in the hallway. That was rough, she said quietly. For what it's worth, your solution is brilliant. Marcus just doesn't understand what he's asking for. Thanks, Sophia, I replied, but appreciation doesn't help when he's going to torpedo the whole project with his impossible demands. Later that afternoon, Marcus sent an email outlining concerns about the current direction of the Sequoia demo, copying the entire executive team and my colleagues. The email implied that I was resistant to feedback and unwilling to push technological boundaries, directly contradicting the reality of the situation. I had reached my breaking point. That evening, I drafted a detailed email to our HR director, Elena, outlining the pattern of behavior I had experienced working with Marcus. I documented specific instances of him taking credit for my ideas, making impossible demands, publicly undermining me, and creating a hostile work environment. Elena's response came the next morning, suggesting a mediated conversation between Marcus and me to align on expectations. It was the kind of generic HR response that made it clear she either didn't understand the severity of the situation or more likely wasn't willing to challenge a VP. In a last-ditch effort, I requested a private meeting with Richard, our CEO. To my surprise, he agreed to meet that afternoon. I came prepared with documentation of my contributions to the company, the original Sequoia system I had built, and specific examples of how Marcus's leadership was impeding our progress. Richard listened politely, but I could tell he wasn't fully engaged. When I finished, he sighed. Blaine, I value your contributions to this company immensely, but Marcus has brought in record sales and has the confidence of our board. These personality conflicts happen in high-pressure environments. I need you both to find a way to work together, especially with the Sequoia Capital pitch coming up. It was clear that Richard had already taken sides, and it wasn't mine. That evening, I received an unexpected email from a competitor who had been trying to recruit me for months. They were offering a senior architect position with a substantial salary increase, more creative control, and a more collaborative culture. For the first time, I seriously considered leaving Apex. The final straw came the next day. Marcus called an emergency meeting with the executive team to discuss the demo. I wasn't invited despite being the lead engineer on the project. I only found out about it when Laura texted me, having heard about it from another colleague. During that meeting, Marcus apparently presented a new direction for the demo, which was essentially the solution I had proposed, slightly repackaged. When Daniel pointed out the similarity to my approach, Marcus claimed he had been pushing Blaine toward this solution for weeks, but that I had been resistant to guidance. I learned all this from James, who heard it from a friend in the infrastructure team, who had been brought in to discuss implementation details. The company grapevine was efficient, if nothing else. That night I went home and updated my resume. The next morning, I submitted it to the competitor who had reached out. By the end of the week, I had an offer letter in my inbox promising everything Apex had failed to deliver: recognition, respect, and a healthy work environment. As I sat staring at that offer letter, a plan began to form in my mind. I had given 5 years of my life to building the Sequoia system. I had poured my creativity, expertise, and countless late nights into making it a reality. And now Marcus was going to present it as his brainchild to one of the most important venture capital firms in the industry. I couldn't just walk away quietly. Not this time. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. Nobody at Apex, except me, truly understood how the Sequoia system worked. I had built it from the ground up, written every critical algorithm, designed the architecture, and documented only the basics. There were countless custom configurations, workarounds, and optimizations that existed only in my head or in notes that only I could fully interpret. This wasn't intentional job security on my part. It was simply the reality of being the sole developer of a complex system for several years. When you build something from scratch, you develop an intuitive understanding that's impossible to transfer completely, even with the best documentation. Marcus, with his non-technical background, understood less than anyone. He could barely navigate the user interface, let alone comprehend the complex back-end systems that made everything work. Yet he was positioning himself as the visionary behind Sequoia, preparing to demonstrate it to people who might ask technical questions he couldn't possibly answer. I sat in my apartment that evening, the competitor's offer letter on my coffee table, contemplating my options. The ethical engineer in me said I should ensure a smooth transition, document everything meticulously, and leave Apex in the best possible position to succeed without me. But another part of me, the part that had endured months of disrespect and manipulation, whispered that perhaps Marcus deserved to experience the consequences of his actions. Laura called me that night, concerned after seeing me leave the office early, something I rarely did. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You seemed off today." I hesitated, then decided to trust her. "I got an offer from Vertex Systems. I'm seriously considering taking it." There was a pause on the line. "Can't say I blame you," she finally replied. "Things have gotten pretty toxic here." "The thing is," I continued, "I'm not sure how to leave. Marcus has pushed me to the breaking point, but I've put so much of myself into Sequoia. The idea of him taking credit for my work in front of Sequoia Capital makes me physically ill." "You could document everything before you go," Laura suggested. "Make it clear who really built the system." "Documentation won't matter," I said. "Marcus will still take credit, and Richard will let him because he's too valuable to the board." We talked for nearly an hour, discussing ethical boundaries and professional responsibilities. Laura understood my frustration, but gently reminded me that how I handled this transition would reflect on me professionally for years to come. After we hung up, I considered my options carefully. Option 1. Resign quietly, provide detailed documentation, and hope that karma eventually caught up with Marcus. Option 2. Escalate to the board of directors, bypassing Richard entirely, though, without concrete evidence of misconduct beyond my word against Marcus's. This seemed unlikely to succeed. Option 3. Let Marcus demonstrate the Sequoia system to Sequoia Capital, without fully understanding how it worked, and allow nature to take its course. The third option was becoming increasingly appealing. I wasn't planning to sabotage anything, I told myself. I would simply no longer be there to save Marcus from his own technical ignorance. Over the next few days, I began implementing subtle changes to the demo system. Nothing malicious, but I built in what programmers sometimes call dead man switches, or fail-safes. These were essentially safety mechanisms that required specific actions to keep the system running smoothly during a demonstration. For instance, one critical visualization required refreshing the data cache before presentation to prevent freezing. Another needed a specific sequence of interactions to properly transition between different datasets. These weren't bugs exactly. They were just peculiarities of a complex system that had been built and rebuilt over years. Normally, I would handle these quirks automatically during a demo, or I would document them clearly for anyone else who needed to run the presentation. This time, I created documentation that was technically complete, but omitted these critical operational details. Someone who really understood the system might notice the gaps, but Marcus certainly wouldn't. I also removed some of the error handling routines I had built in that made the system gracefully recover from mistakes. Again, not sabotage, just returning the system to its natural state without my years of added protections. As the pitch meeting approached, I found myself oscillating between guilt and vindication. Was I being unprofessional, or was I simply allowing Marcus to experience the natural consequences of claiming expertise he didn't have? The weekend before the big pitch, we had a final rehearsal with the executive team. Marcus ran through the demo following my written instructions to the letter, and everything worked perfectly. He was visibly pleased with himself, shooting me a smug look that said, "See, this isn't so hard." What he didn't realize was that I was still there monitoring everything, ready to step in if something went seriously wrong. I had sanitized the test data to avoid any edge cases that might trigger the system's more temperamental behaviors. The real demo with live data from Sequoia Capital would be far less forgiving. After the rehearsal, Marcus called me into his office. I expected some last-minute questions about the system, but instead he had a different agenda. "I've been reviewing the presentation for Monday," he said, leaning back in his ergonomic chair. "I think we need to streamline it. Cut out some of the technical explanations." "The technical details are important," I replied. "The Sequoia partners will have questions about how the system works, not just what it does." Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "They're investors, not engineers. They care about market potential, not algorithm specifics." "Some of them have technical backgrounds," I pointed out. And even those who don't will want to understand what makes our technology unique. I've made my decision, Marcus said firmly. We're focusing on the business impact, and I'll be handling the entire presentation myself. I stared at him. You want me to sit out the meeting entirely? Your presence might confuse the messaging, he said smoothly. We need to present a unified vision, not get bogged down in technical debates. The real message was clear. Marcus didn't want anyone in the room who might contradict him or expose his lack of technical understanding. He was pushing me aside, entirely planning to present my work as his own, without even the pretense of collaboration. As I left his office, I made my decision. I would accept the offer from Vertex Systems, and I would time my resignation for maximum impact. That weekend, I finalized the demo system, removing my temporary safeguards, but leaving all the inherent quirks and potential failure points intact. I wrote up detailed transfer notes that explained the system components, but conveniently omitted the operational knowledge that only I possessed. I drafted my resignation letter short and professional, giving the standard 2 weeks' notice. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office, early resignation letter in my bag, a strange calm having settled over me. The Sequoia Capital partners were scheduled to arrive at 10. The demo was set for 10:30. Timing would be everything. Monday morning arrived with an atmosphere of barely contained excitement and nervous energy throughout the Apex offices. The Sequoia Capital meeting was all anyone could talk about. $20 million in potential funding was on the line, enough to accelerate our growth and secure the company's future for years to come. I arrived early, around 7:30, well before most of the team. The office was quiet as I settled at my desk, reviewing the demo system one last time. Everything was in place. The system would work exactly as it was programmed, to no more and no less. Without my intervention, it would follow its logic to the letter, quirks and all. Around 8 people began filtering in. Laura arrived with 2 coffees, placing one on my desk with a questioning look. Ready for the big day? I gave her a small smile. More than you know. By 9, the office was buzzing with activity. The conference room was being prepared. Catering had arrived with an elaborate spread of pastries and fruit, and marketing was setting up branded materials around the space. Richard was pacing near the entrance, checking his watch every few minutes, while Daniel reviewed slides on his laptop, making last-minute adjustments. Marcus arrived at 9:15, dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He exuded confidence as he strode through the office, stopping to give pep talks to various team members. When he reached my desk, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. All set with the demo, Blaine? He asked loudly enough for others to hear. The system is exactly as we discussed, I replied truthfully. Excellent. This is going to be a game changer for Apex. He lowered his voice. I need you to stay at your desk during the meeting. If anything goes wrong with the system, you can troubleshoot from here. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Of course. At 9:45, a ripple of excitement moved through the office as the Sequoia Capital partners arrived. There were 3 of them, escorted by Richard Jennifer Blackwell, a legendary investor known for her sharp questions, Michael Chen, who specialized in enterprise software investments, and Robert Stein, who had a reputation for being technically savvy despite his finance background. They were ushered into the main conference room where Marcus, Daniel, and other executives were waiting. The glass walls gave me a clear view of the proceedings as introductions were made and initial pleasantries exchanged. Marcus was in his element, shaking hands confidently and laughing at something Jennifer said. At precisely 10:25, I saw Marcus move toward the large display at the front of the room, ready to begin the demo. This was my moment. I gathered my belongings, placing my laptop and personal items into my bag. I took out my resignation letter and the competitor's signed offer letter, tucking them into my jacket pocket. I walked calmly to the conference room and knocked on the glass door. Richard looked annoyed at the interruption, but waved me in. I apologize for the interruption, I said politely, but there's an urgent matter I need to discuss with Marcus before the demonstration begins. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Can it wait? We're about to start. I'm afraid not, I replied. It will only take a minute. With visible reluctance, Marcus excused himself and stepped into the hallway with me, closing the door behind him. This better be important, he hissed, all pretense of collegiality gone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my resignation letter, handing it to him. I'm resigning effective immediately. This is my 2 weeks' notice. Marcus stared at the letter, then at me, his expression shifting from anger to confusion to something approaching panic as the implications sank in. "You can't do this now. We're in the middle of the most important presentation in the company's history." "Actually, I can," I replied calmly. "And I am." "We don't negotiate with staff," Marcus said, his voice hard, trying to regain control of the situation. "If this is some attempt to leverage a promotion or raise, it's not going to work." I nodded, a sense of calm washing over me that I hadn't felt in months. "I'm not negotiating. I've accepted a position elsewhere. I just thought you should know before you begin the demonstration that you have about 2 minutes before the Sequoia system encounters an authentication timeout unless the proper sequence is initiated." Marcus's face paled. "What sequence? You never mentioned any sequence." "It's in the documentation," I said, which was technically true. It was there, buried in thousands of lines of technical notes that I knew he had never read. Page 176, I believe. Marcus glanced back at the conference room where everyone was waiting expectantly. "Fix it," he demanded. "Now." "I'm afraid I can't do that," I replied. "As I said, I'm resigning effective immediately. Here's my notice and a 2-minute warning for the Sequoia demo." I turned and walked back toward my desk to collect my bag. "You can't just leave," Marcus called after me loud enough that heads turned throughout the office. I paused, looking back at him. "I believe California is an at-will employment state, Marcus. I can, and I am." As I walked out, I caught a glimpse of Marcus rushing back into the conference room, a forced smile on his face as he apologized for the interruption. He began the demo, clicking through the initial screens with shaky confidence. I took my time, gathering my remaining belongings in no particular hurry now. I could see through the glass walls as Marcus navigated through the first few screens of the demo. For about 90 seconds, everything went smoothly. He was just starting to relax, explaining the predictive analytics module when it happened. The system froze. Not dramatically with error messages or crashes, but in that peculiar way that complex software sometimes does, where everything just stops responding. Marcus clicked desperately at the mouse, his narrative faltering. He tried to restart the visualization, but nothing happened. Through the glass, I could see the CTO, Daniel, looking at Richard, his face slack-jawed with surprise and growing alarm. The Sequoia partners exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from interest to concern. Marcus looked up, his eyes searching the office desperately until they found me. The panic in his face was unmistakable. He gestured urgently for me to come help. I simply shouldered my bag, gave him a small smile, and walked toward the exit. As the elevator doors closed behind me, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. 5 years of work culminating in this moment of perfect justice. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I had simply stopped protecting Marcus from his own hubris. The system was behaving exactly as it was programmed to, without my interventions and workarounds. In the lobby, I texted Laura. "It's done. Good luck with everything." Her reply came seconds later. "Oh my God. Total chaos upstairs. Worth it." I stepped out into the sunlight, a free woman at last. "Absolutely," I typed back. "Absolutely worth it." The aftermath was both more dramatic and more satisfying than I could have anticipated. According to Laura, who gave me daily updates, the Sequoia demo had descended into complete chaos after I left. Marcus had tried desperately to recover, attempting to restart the system, while making increasingly implausible excuses about unexpected server loads and temporary network issues. Daniel, our CTO, had attempted to intervene, but he was unfamiliar with the specific error states the system was displaying. Without the proper authentication sequence, which required specific inputs in a precise order, the system had entered a protective lockdown mode, exactly as it was designed to do. Marcus kept getting more and more flustered. Laura told me over drinks the evening after my dramatic exit. He started throwing around technical terms that made no sense in context. Robert Stein, the technical guy from Sequoia, just kept asking more specific questions that Marcus couldn't answer. Eventually, Richard had been forced to apologize to the investors and suggest rescheduling the demonstration. Jennifer Blackwell, the lead partner, had apparently replied with a cool, "Perhaps when you have your technical team better prepared, making it clear." She understood exactly what had happened. The Sequoia Capital partners had left without making any commitments, their interest in leading our Series C round clearly diminished by the debacle they had witnessed. As soon as they were gone, all hell had broken loose. Marcus had stormed through the office, demanding to know where I had gone, and why no one had warned him about the fatal flaws in the demo system. Daniel had tried to access the system himself, only to discover that without my specialized knowledge, even he couldn't quickly resolve the issues. Richard pulled everyone into the conference room afterward, Laura continued. He was livid, demanding to know how we could have been so unprepared for such a crucial meeting. When Daniel explained that you were the only one who fully understood all aspects of the Sequoia system, Richard asked why better documentation hadn't been created. This was when things had gotten really interesting. Several team members, emboldened by my departure and the catastrophic demo failure, had spoken up about Marcus's leadership style. James had pointed out that I had created documentation, but that Marcus had repeatedly prioritized new features over proper knowledge transfer. Sophia had mentioned the multiple times I had raised concerns about the tight timeline and unrealistic expectations, only to be dismissed. Even more surprisingly, Daniel had finally found his backbone. Laura said Daniel actually stood up to Richard, I said, still finding it hard to believe. He told him that he had warned about putting a non-technical person in charge of product development but had been overruled. The day after my departure, Marcus had called an emergency meeting to salvage the situation. He had proposed reaching out to me, offering whatever it takes to get me to come back and fix the system before a rescheduled demo could be arranged. Richard, however, had received a concerning call from Jennifer Blackwell at Sequoia Capital. She had expressed reservations not about the technical glitch itself, but about the obvious disconnect between the technical team and leadership that it revealed. She had pointedly asked Richard about the company's retention strategy for key technical talent. This had prompted Richard to begin asking questions about why I had left so abruptly. Elena from HR had been forced to reveal my previous complaints about Marcus's behavior, which she had downplayed at the time. Other team members, seeing the writing on the wall, had come forward with their own experiences. It's like a dam broke, Laura explained. Suddenly, everyone was talking about how Marcus would take credit for other people's work, how he bullied the technical team, especially the women, and how he made impossible demands without understanding the technical constraints. By the end of the week, Richard had initiated a formal investigation into Marcus's management practices. Marcus had been temporarily removed from overseeing the technical teams, with Daniel stepping in to manage the Sequoia system recovery efforts. The most vindicating moment came when Sophia forwarded me an email from Richard to the entire company, announcing a review of leadership practices and emphasizing the importance of recognizing individual contributions and maintaining a respectful work environment. While he didn't mention Marcus by name, the implication was clear. They've been trying to piece together how the system works from your documentation, James told me when he called the following week. But it's slow going. Daniel asked if you might be willing to consult just to help transition the system. I declined politely. My new position at Vertex Systems had already begun, and I was discovering what it felt like to work in an environment where my expertise was valued and my contributions recognized. The final twist came about 3 weeks after my departure. Laura called me, barely containing her excitement. You won't believe what happened today, she said. Marcus is out, completely gone. Richard announced it this morning. According to the official communication, Marcus had decided to pursue other opportunities, but everyone knew he had been fired. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of behavior that went beyond just my experiences. Several former employees had been contacted and had shared similar stories. What's more, the Sequoia Capital deal had fallen through entirely. Without a working demo and with questions about leadership and technical talent retention, they had decided to pass on the investment round. This had sent Richard and the board into crisis mode, as the company had been counting on that funding to sustain operations through the next phase of growth. There's talk of another round of layoffs, Laura admitted. The financial situation isn't great without that investment. I felt a momentary pang of guilt, wondering if my actions had inadvertently hurt innocent colleagues, but Laura quickly dispelled that notion. Don't you dare feel bad, she said firmly. This isn't on you. The company put too much power in the hands of someone who abused it, and now they're facing the consequences. Besides, several of us have already started looking for new positions given the uncertainty. Over the following months, I watched from a distance as Apex Technologies struggled to recover. They eventually secured funding, but at much less favorable terms than Sequoia Capital would have offered. Marcus quietly took a position at a much smaller startup, several steps down from his VP role at Apex. I ran into James at a tech conference about 6 months later. He and Sophia had both left Apex, finding positions at more stable companies. He told me that the culture had begun to shift after Marcus's departure, with Richard taking a more active interest in the day-to-day operations, and Daniel finding his voice as an advocate for the engineering team. "Your exit was legendary," James said with a grin. "People still talk about it. It changed things, Blaine. Not just for Apex, but for all of us who saw that it's possible to stand up to toxic leadership." I wasn't proud of how things had ended exactly. In an ideal world, I would have found a way to address the issues through proper channels. But in the real world, sometimes the only way to affect change is to allow natural consequences to unfold, to stop protecting people from the results of their own actions. As I settled into my new role, leading a team that respected my expertise and valued my contributions, I realized that the most important skill I had gained from my time at Apex wasn't technical at all. It was learning to recognize my own worth and refusing to let others diminish it for their gain. A year has passed since that fateful day when I walked out of Apex Technology, leaving Marcus to face the consequences of his actions. My new position at Vertex Systems has been everything I hoped for and more. I lead a team of talented engineers who respect my expertise, and I report to a CTO who understands both the technical and human aspects of software development. What surprised me most about my transition wasn't the technical challenges of a new system or the adjustment to a different company culture. It was how long it took me to unlearn the defensive habits I had developed working under Marcus. For months, I found myself over-documenting everything, preparing exhaustive justifications for technical decisions, and flinching whenever my new manager called me into his office. "Blaine, these reports are incredibly thorough," my manager Thomas said during my first performance review. "But you don't need to defend every decision so comprehensively. We trust your judgment. That's why we hired you." It took time to believe him to accept that I was in an environment where my expertise was valued rather than exploited. Gradually, the knot of anxiety that had become my constant companion at Apex began to loosen. About 6 months after I left, I ran into Laura at a tech meetup downtown. She had finally left Apex too, joining a promising startup as their lead front-end developer. "You started an exodus," she told me over coffee afterward. "After you left and Marcus was fired, people realized they didn't have to put up with a toxic environment." James left 2 weeks after me. Sophia got headhunted by a major tech firm. Even Elena from HR eventually quit. Laura shared that Apex had struggled to rebuild after the Sequoia Capital fiasco. They had eventually secured alternative funding, but at much less favorable terms. The company had gone through a round of layoffs and restructuring. "Daniel actually stepped up in a big way," Laura said, surprising me. "Once Marcus was gone, he found his voice. He's been advocating for better recognition of the engineering team's contributions and pushing back against unrealistic deadlines from sales." I was glad to hear it, though I couldn't help but think how much pain could have been avoided if Daniel had found that courage sooner. The most unexpected encounter came about 8 months after my departure. I was representing Vertex at a major industry conference when I literally bumped into Richard, Apex's CEO, at the networking reception. There was an awkward moment of recognition before he extended his hand. "Blaine, good to see you. I hear you're doing well at Vertex." I shook his hand, maintaining my professionalism despite the flood of memories. Thank you." Richard glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard, then lowered his voice. "I owe you an apology. I should have listened when you tried to tell me about the problems with Marcus. The company paid a high price for my oversight." His admission caught me off guard. I had expected defensiveness, or perhaps cold politeness, not accountability. "What happened after I left?" I asked, curious about his perspective. Richard sighed. "The Sequoia deal fell through completely. That was a $20 million mistake. But more importantly, we lost some of our best talent, yourself included. It forced me to take a hard look at our leadership culture." He explained that they had brought in consultants to help rebuild the company culture, focusing on recognizing technical contributions and creating channels for employees to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. "I was too focused on sales and growth," Richard admitted. "I didn't pay enough attention to how we were achieving those numbers or the cost to our team. It's a mistake I won't make again." As I walked away from that conversation, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. My dramatic exit hadn't just been about personal vindication, it had catalyzed genuine change at Apex. Sometimes, systems, whether technical or human, need to break down completely before they can be rebuilt properly. This experience taught me several profound lessons that I carry with me every day. First, your knowledge and skills have value, and you have the right to be recognized for your contributions. In technical fields especially, there's often a disconnect between those who understand the work and those who take credit for it. Never allow someone else to diminish your worth. Second, documentation and knowledge sharing are powerful tools, but they're also double-edged swords. Share your knowledge generously with those who respect it, but be strategic about how much you make yourself indispensable in toxic environments. Third, there's a difference between being professional and being a doormat. Professionalism doesn't mean enduring disrespect or manipulation. Sometimes the most professional thing you can do is set clear boundaries and be willing to walk away when they're crossed. Fourth, company culture starts at the top. Richard's neglect allowed Marcus's behavior to flourish. When evaluating future opportunities, I now pay close attention to how leadership treats people at all levels, not just their technical expertise or business acumen. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I learned that sometimes you have to be willing to walk away from something you've built in order to preserve your integrity and self-respect. The Sequoia system was my creation, my professional legacy at Apex, but staying would have meant continuing to enable a toxic culture. As I lead my own team now, I make a conscious effort to recognize individual contributions, to listen when concerns are raised, and to create an environment where technical expertise is respected. I'm not perfect, but I strive to be the kind of leader I wished I had had. If you're in a similar situation, feeling undervalued and manipulated in a toxic work environment, know that you have options. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Your skills have value, and there are workplaces where they will be appreciated. The path to self-advocacy isn't always as dramatic as mine was. Sometimes it's as simple as documenting your contributions, building a support network, and being willing to look for opportunities elsewhere. But whatever form it takes, standing up for yourself is always worth it in the end. Have you ever had to deal with a toxic boss or workplace? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences is the first step toward finding the courage to make a change. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond.